bought a property in Egypt, and what they do for you is they give you the property.
Hey yo, chill the fuck out, yo. You sitting there playing with the.
So the trailer for Jurassic World Rebirth dropped earlier this month, and some of you might remember that despite some concerns, I was trying to remain cautiously optimistic. Well, score another point for pessimism, because what the fuck was that? I mean seriously, I saw the Vanity Fair pictures the day before and it was somewhat promising, so I can't believe that most of my interest and positive expectations were somehow killed off that quickly. In fact, I'm kinda mad about it, so I'm gonna dedicate this video to running through the whole thing and sharing how I feel. Though I want to address something first, because I have seen how rabidly defensive some people have been over Rebirth so far. Yes, I am going to be making a lot of judgments and assumptions based off of a tiny fraction of the actual movie. You might think that's unfair, but if you're allowed to say, "Oh my god, I'm so excited, this looks great," based on a mere 2 minutes of chopped up footage, then I can do the opposite. Because believe it or not, a movie's marketing plays a big role in how you decide if you're going to go watch it. The first thing to take note of is the new sauropod titanosaurus, and honestly I'd say this is the best original design in the whole trailer. The added musculature, presence of the pretty sails, which may or may not be a reference to the kaiju of the same name, and a bit of extra colour and patterns makes this sauropod the most interesting and probably most well designed one we've seen in these movies so far. Definitely not flawless though. From what we can see of it, the head is a little ugly, and the nereus looks shrunken in. The whip-like tail is also an odd choice for a titanosaur specifically, but considering everything else, I can still appreciate it for what it is. We'll have to wait to get a better view of it, including some missing body parts like the feet, but I'm gonna make the uncertain statement that I do like this design. I feel like they did a decent job here, all things considered, especially for modern Jurassic. However, there is definitely something to be said about the actions of these sauropods, or lack thereof. From the short clip we see of them, they're just kind of chilling, as is typical for sauropods in these movies, and pretty much everything we've seen so far point to this being an ooh-ah moment, which would be really disappointing considering the announcement teaser almost made it seem like we might have been getting a more aggressive depiction of these animals with the way the tail raises up behind them. You could argue that they might not want to show that in the trailer to save some surprises, but I feel like they show infinitely more spoilery stuff than a herbivore being angry at the main characters. It's such a weird choice too when they go on to state that these dinosaurs are meant to be more dangerous than many of the ones we've seen before. Accompanied by the titanosaurus is one of the many info dumps present in this trailer. This first one is just about them needing DNA to cure diseases. It's nothing we didn't already know, and I don't really mind the convenience of it being tied to the biggest dinosaurs on one specific island. It's pretty likely to just be a lie so they can do shady corporate stuff with the DNA anyway. So this is fine plot-wise, but it contributes to a wider problem, not with the movie but with the trailer itself, where it is just unappealing to watch. Plot and lore are essentially just said to the audience, no hints or mystery, no rough ideas of what the movie is about. They won't even grant us the luxury of it sounding like natural dialogue between characters. It's as if it's written specifically to tell you as the viewer what the deal is. Not only that, but this trailer is uncomfortably packed with these Marvel-esque Hollywood jokes. The first of which, and probably the least eye-roll worthy one, being right after the dialogue I just talked about.
I can guarantee your safety, more or less.
More or less?
And they just set the weirdest tone for this movie, especially after the writer had claimed that this one would feel similar to the original. This is really not the vibe I'm getting. In fact, I don't feel like this trailer is reminding me much of any of the rest of the franchise. It's not that other Jurassic trailers have never had either of these things before, but they're in such abundance here, about a minute of the trailer's runtime in fact, and feel so robotic and lazy that they stand out in the worst way. You can go watch the Super Bowl spot, which cuts a good bit of this out, and I feel like you can absolutely sense the difference between the two. It doesn't help that 50% of the backing track consists of those epic cinematic drum beats that are just spammed whenever the editors feel it's necessary, and then cut out for all the dramatic moments and punchlines. There's no real atmosphere or draw, be it an emotional or narrative one. It's so poorly thought out that I'm not even sure what's being advertised to me here apart from corny humor and more dinosaurs. This doesn't feel like a trailer in the same way that the Vaginoplasty song from Amelia Perez doesn't feel like music.
Adam's apple reduction.
Yes, yes, yes!
We get one more shitty piece of dialogue where one character asks a completely nonsensical question in, "Do we have to get a sample from an egg?" As if that's somehow less appealing than getting it from a massive dangerous prehistoric animal, just so the guy who knows stuff can give a witty, cool comeback.
I suppose we could try and get it from the parent, but they're a flying carnivore the size of an F-16.
Ray who? Ray Skywalker. That takes us to our second creature to take a gander at, being the brand new Quetzalcoatlus. There seem to be multiple flying about that may or may not be different, but this is the only one we get to see, and sadly it's a downgrade from Dominion. Dominion Quets brought all different types of people across the internet to appreciate a Jurassic World design of all things. And what Rebirth is giving us in its place is a sad looking crest it didn't have in a place it didn't have it, an incredibly thin and fragile looking lower beak that might break if it did as little as trying to carry its own eggs, these cartoonishly angry eyebrows, and an awkwardly structured neck that looks like it's a stuffed toy made to be swung around by a dog or a 3-year-old. The colours were nice, but they're definitely not worth sacrificing everything else for. Apparently it was meant to be a Thanatos Dracon at first, but that got changed for some reason. This isn't important, Edzarchids generally kind of look the same anyway, but I feel like that was probably the better option for the sake of not drawing comparisons that don't need to be drawn. Not to mention it would have introduced a lot of people to a new extinct creature, which is always welcome unless it's completely butchered like in 65.
Oh my.
Well, here it is. The newest anti-upper in the Jurassic franchise, the mutant. Having a non-dinosaur or messed up fake dinosaur as a focal point in the movies has been one of the biggest criticisms from even the people that have liked them since the first Jurassic World. So regardless of the money this franchise has been making recently, I'm really not sure why they'd want to quadruple down on this. You can talk all you want about the themes of the franchise, it does not change the fact that they could have easily used a small pterosaur or something instead of Locus in Dominion, and that they could have easily stopped this new creature from coming across as far removed from an actual dinosaur as it is. I mean seriously, look at this shot and tell me that it doesn't look like it could be from any old sci-fi thriller. From the little we see of it, this does not even look like a mutated animal. It appears far too clean, symmetrical, and functional, with no noticeable similarities to real-world counterparts. They have even outright stated that its appearance is inspired by movie monsters. It being a prototype mistake will more than likely be second to its role as an evil foil for the protagonists. If that weren't the case, they'd make an actual defect and not a dollar store muto. And to make everything even less inspired and creative, they went with the T-Rex for the base, as if we haven't gotten enough of both the Rex and other big carnivores already. A friend thought it was going to be a hadrosaur at first, based on a screenshot of the foot. That could have been interesting at least. But why bother making a more unique attempt at the concept when we can just do T-Rex instead? As for its existence in the story, yes it makes sense to have prototype failures, and yes it fits the genetic theming. But why can't it just be in a test tube like the two-headed raptors, or a corpse in a lab somewhere? Why does it specifically have to be an evil murder creature that actively attacks the cast and takes time away from the stars of the franchise? Hell, why does it have to be an evil murder creature at all? And I'm sure it won't be bulletproof either, right? Me when I accidentally add the animal gene that stops the dinosaurs from getting shot. Oh no! I did it again, silly me. I could be proven wrong. This might be the most complex and nuanced animal in the franchise yet, but I have little faith and little reason to hold any. Since the trailer dropped, some people have been begging others to trust Gareth, he's made good movies. Trust David, he's written good movies. But this is barely a reason to be cautiously optimistic. Never mind outright ignoring any potential faults and silencing criticism. Shocking concept, your goat might be washed. But also, it's been rumored a lot recently that Universal had a tight grip on this movie since before they hired Gareth as a director. He could very well be limited in his ability to correct what the studio has been gunning for. Fittingly, I can finally talk about the setting that this whole movie is built on. This island was the research facility for the original Jurassic Park. The dinosaurs they produced were too dangerous, and the worst of the worst were left here. How many times is this going to happen? We started with one island, then Isla Sorna that was there the whole time where the dinosaurs were born and raised, and also they were going to be in a San Diego zoo at first, which began construction but got scrapped. Then he had a business partner in Ben Lockwood with an underground mansion basement, and now there's this other island completely separate from the 5 deaths. It's near fucking Barbados somewhere, and they explicitly used this for research and testing. Not only is continually adding to and changing Jurassic lore like this completely unnecessary, but in cases like this one it goes against the characters and story that we came to know in the original film. John Hammond, despite his beloved catchphrase, was a cheap man and either wanted to cut corners to save on money or did not have the proper funding available for a project of that scope. Concerns for safety were overlooked, many important areas of the park appear understaffed, some of which are also underpaid, and it's somewhat implied that he avoids and delays a case regarding Joffrey's death while he sets up the guest tour. So why would someone that wants to avoid spending money, whether it be a want or a need, even when it's at the expense of others, have bought 3 separate islands and put facilities, teams, and dinosaurs on each and every one of them? This is a retcon. Instead of simply not being willing or able to put quite as much money and care into his passion project as he leads people to believe, he actively chose to waste a bunch of funding on what could have likely been restricted to just the one island with proper management of space, and that's assuming that all these places were somehow needed. This seems to be just another careless decision that proves that both Universal and the directors only seem to understand the movie that allowed these sequels to exist in the first place at the most basic level. Not just that, but the danger comment also comes across as contradictory. Hammond, and to some extent the staff present on the island, were in over their head and didn't quite understand what they were messing with. According to Rebirth, however, he and InGen did actually have control and knew full well what the dangers were because they recognized and ditched their evil dinosaurs for an entirely new island hundreds of miles away, but then made all of those mistakes anyway and still got many people killed. Also, Nublar was already housing dinosaurs that could spit venom at people through the fences if they so pleased. Raptors that were constantly trying to break out, they even chose to keep a specific raptor that killed a man and mauled a bunch of its packmates to death, and had open areas that housed dinosaurs like the Triceratops that likely only didn't cause any problems because it was sick and could barely move, and then were proven to have the potential to be very dangerous and intimidating in the very next movie. What about these rebirth dinosaurs could possibly make them seem like a manageable nuisance in comparison? If the answer is to somehow make them even more malicious than they already have been, and maybe have bullets bounce off them for good measure, then congratulations, that sounds like any old monster movie. Whatever it is, stop touching franchise lore. Not every gap needs to be filled in, and not every potential opportunity needs to be pursued. Scrapping the mainland dinosaur setup, even if Dominion already wasted it, and trampling on older movies in the process is not the best look. Dilophosaurus only appears for a brief moment, and from what we can see of it, it looks about the same as any other dilo we've seen, maybe a little taller, but just like the one we got in Dominion, the coloration is a massive letdown. The body colors seem to be a minor improvement over what we got in the previous movie, and I will admit the frill is very nice, but when you compare what we can see here to its original appearance, you can see just how much blander this one appears to be. The JP Dilo, and many of its adaptations, have had these dirty greens and browns with a unique highlighted pattern, its frill containing striking reds and yellows that stand out against the pouring rain. She's a very pretty lady, and being venomous is reflected in how it compares to the other dinosaurs. They clearly put a lot of work into it, even when it was for only a single appearance in the dark. They made 3 separate heads for the animatronic just to get the scene to work, only for it to be brought back and presented with not nearly the same love and care as it once was multiple times now. Again, solid frill colors. They might even work better than the old ones when it comes to being presented in broad daylight, but that is no excuse for those shameful body colors. I can hope that at the very least it will be treated better than it was in the previous movie. But considering the suspiciously T-Rex shaped mess in the background of this scene, I'm not exactly betting on it. Speaking of, the T-Rex. And yep, that's a T-Rex. It sure seems to be one. It has some cool new colors, but that is basically all there is to note about it. It is in fact the Jurassic Park Tyrannosaurus Rex. It seems they're gonna reference the river scene from the books. That's fun, I suppose. Okay, theory time. The skeleton at the start of the movie is actually Rexy, who was killed by the Buck and Doe shortly after they met. It's doing the pose with the banner, which would be an obvious nod back to that first movie, and the head is inside a box, which could imply that it was somehow removed before death. Subscribe for more Jurassic World Rebirth theories. My thinking cap is glued on tight today. Some of you might have been waiting for this one. Let's talk about the new Spinosaurus. The first shots of it, and initial photos that were published online, only really showed a more natural looking sail with some decent colors on it, and what might have been a pedal tail. This is good, it was promising, but then you get to the head. The skull is far too wide and crooked, with a crest that's too small and lacking in colour to be noticed, at least from this angle, making the top of its head look awkwardly bald. Not that a more defined crest would have saved it from the disgusting degree of shrink wrapping present, this massive random divot behind the eyes, and again what seem to be artificially angry eyebrows built into the skull and crest structure. Then of course, probably most notably, is its really short fat neck. One that somehow also looks as if they've managed to shrink wrap it considering these bumps that almost look like oversized neck vertebrae. What is this? This is just the Pyroraptor all over again. Is this a running joke between the directors or something? Like, is this meant to be funny? Because it's pretty weird that it's happened twice now, and I don't understand what's going on. Listen. No matter what they did with Spinosaurus in this movie, they were bound to upset people. But by striking a balance between Jurassic and accurate, you can almost certainly satisfy the majority of people. So it's astounding how they somehow managed to make a design that seems to be unappealing to all sorts of groups of people with the way they went about it. And it is definitely not because they refuse to accept a compromise. This just looks off-putting, both accuracy and nostalgia aside. It's ugly. I am honestly baffled by the way this came out, and desperately want to know who the target audience for this design was, because if this was their idea of meeting in the middle, they sure didn't do a good job of showing it. This is not reminiscent of the Jurassic Park 3 Spinosaurus, nor is it reminiscent of the real Spinosaurus. And honestly, despite some comparisons to Fallen Kingdom's baryonyx, which I do kind of see, it doesn't even look much like other Jurassic designs. It's just its own monstrous, hideous little thing, and that's almost admirable. There has been quite a lot of edits already that are proposing fixes or showcasing alternatives, but you wouldn't even need to look at those for inspiration. Accurate edits of JP3 Spino have been public on the internet for years, ranging from basically just the one from the movie except with a few tweaks, to an essentially pure genome Spino with the same coloration, most of which probably would have worked better than this half-accurate, half-eyesore. Hopefully the one we see in the trailer is just an outlier, there are at least 3 of them, but this most certainly does not spark joy. Then, alongside them is the new mosasaurus, and at first glance it definitely looks like a pretty notable improvement over the one from the World Trilogy. The edgy crocodile armor is gone, and it's got counter shading, sign me up. But that's not the only thing they changed though, is it? Take a closer look at this picture of the head. Pause if you need to, and try to think about what the problem might be. If your thought was, gee willikers Shifty V, it would appear that by looking at the shrink-wrapped skull of this mosa, they have created an entirely new hole in its skeleton that wasn't even present on the 2015 design. Then congratulations, here's a cookie. Its head also comes across more stubby and boxy compared to the original two. Not just that, but while it's not super clear, you can see what might be a crocodilian row of teeth where they're lodged into the skin of the jaw itself, which would imply that it has no lips. It's still lacking distinctly mosasaur features in the split tongue, as well as the comically pointy looking fins, which are also not right on top of looking very boring. And not only that, but if you look at some of the other shots of the model, as well as the toys, it seems to be less of a grey or dark brown colour, which is what I thought it was at first, and is actually a mixture of greens and browns. They stole his drip and gave it to a fish. You know, the trailer is over. I've covered everything, but it almost feels like something is missing. What could it be? Oh, right. I've been looking at these designs completely wrong this whole time. You see, many people have assumed that due to the statement about the dinosaurs here being the worst of the worst, as well as the mutant, the two-headed raptor, and the fact that this was the testing facility, that this means that many of the other dinosaurs on the island are also mutated or prototypes. And naturally, this has been used to explain the new designs. Should this be true, it completely recontextualizes the animals we've gone over. But not in the way that you might hope, because I feel like this actually makes them worse. A lot of the designs, despite my issues with them, are still basically the same or pretty similar to designs we've already seen that were on full display at the parks. There's no reason to believe that even the more strikingly different dinos would all be just as passable, if not more so for public view, as what was housed in both park and world. On top of generally having far more interesting color palettes for people to be wowed by. All the issues to note of look more like rookie dinosaur design mistakes, because that's probably what they are. I already mentioned it when talking about the D-Rex, but if you want to display abnormalities in dinosaurs, you could and should be pulling from a vast array of other sources, instead of taking all your design inspiration from the CEO of shrink wrapping. Just a warning that I'm going to show some images of animals that could be uncomfortable to look at, so skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want to see that. Real world deformities can occur due to all sorts of issues. There's selective breeding, with pugs being the most well-known example, but others include this balloon molly that has been bred to look round and fat and has missing vertebrae, or this goldfish with bloated skin around its eyes that threaten its life and impact its day-to-day, all of which are made because customers consider them cute. There are also defects brought on by bad husbandry, which would be something that I would imagine happens in universe quite often, considering the staff have no frame of reference for how to care for these long-gone animals. Metabolic bone disease in reptiles from lack of minerals and UV light, and crooked backs in sharks and other sea life due to lack of space are some examples of this. There's many forms of animal neglect, and this turtle probably experienced just about all of them. And of course, there's a whole host of defects that are caused by injuries or just rolling poorly on the genetic dice, which is even more likely to happen when splicing animal DNA together. Even when you look at purely real-world examples, it's definitely not hard to find something to fit your fictional dinosaurs. But that isn't even the only potential source of inspiration. These next examples lean more into the cool and freaky side, rather than being sad and unfortunate, but I'd still prefer them over generic poorly thought out Jurassic dinosaur number 52. First of all, this franchise has already done weirdly unnatural real dinosaurs before, the most obvious being the Dilophosaurus, but there's also the creepy ass Troodons from the Telltale game, the camouflaging Carnos from the Lost World book, and the Chaos Theory baryonyx that was using echolocation. Other pieces of media have also provided a lot of potential inspiration when it comes to odd and edgy looking dinosaurs and dinosaur adjacent creatures, like Second Extinction or Primeval. Not that I would want to see most of their creatures in a Jurassic movie, but it would have been a much more respectable attempt. Lastly, they could draw from depictions of dinosaurs that predate the first movie, especially on creatures like the Spinosaurus. This would be quite fitting and fun considering how these animals were perceived by the average Joe prior to the release of the first movie, which is something they've done before with creatures like the Deinonychus in Evolution, or less intentionally, the Stegosaurus in Jurassic World for some fucking reason. Point is, if the idea is to have unnatural dinosaurs, they have failed miserably. They aren't realistic, fitting, or interesting, and most importantly, they just don't look good. The only one to even try is the one they base off of a Star Wars monster. Trying to argue that their genetic failures does not hold up when discussing the quality of their designs, nor do any of the other tired talking points used to shut down people that want them to do better, whether it be scientifically or creatively. Stop using excuses made by lazy directors who don't care and rode the wave of what others created to discredit the passion that went into making dinosaurs feel alive. I could definitely go into more depth on that specific topic, but I've talked long enough. I yield my time. So that was the Rebirth trailer and why I did not like it. It does not get me remotely excited for the upcoming film. The dinosaur designs range from decent to mind-boggling, with multiple downgrades from previous movies. The basis of the story appears simple with nothing to really hook me, and the lore related to it has a lot of potential to make older movies worse with its introduction, which is very concerning. And it's just put together so sloppily, with no clear direction that I can gather from it. I know that it might sound like I'm reaching for some of my complaints. It could prove me wrong, and the plot, action, and characters could blow me away, but the last thing I want to do with another Jurassic movie is set my expectations too high again. If I'm right about it, then I avoid giving Universal money they don't deserve and can be thankful to myself for my supposed overly negative mindset. If I'm wrong, great, I'll just have a good time watching it. It'll only mean that I won't have seen it on day one, and that's pretty easy to live with. Thank you for watching me ramble for as long as I have. I would appreciate if you could subscribe to help support the channel and notify yourself of my next uploads. If you'd like to participate in even more of my ramblings, you can actually go to a form that's linked in the description, centered around honestly reviewing dinosaur-related video games, and it's gonna be closing when the first part releases. Regardless, I'll see you next time.
Please don't say they're raptors. They're raptors.
None of what you just said is good.